If you're anything like me, you might want to sometimes jump from listening to great music to also playing some games, watching some movies, whatever it might be on your computer. You might be in a position where you need one box that's going to do it all, and up until now there hasn't really been anything that fits that bill well. And I mean in terms of having good quality sound, but also maybe some gaming type features or some movie watching type features, things like virtual surround sound, being able to adjust things like bass controls, vocal clarity, things like that. There are rudimentary but effective products like the Schiit Sin that I reviewed a while ago, but nothing that's really brought together great quality sound as well as in-depth tweakability for the audio when you want to watch movies or play games. And that might be until now. What I've got here today is the Creative Soundblaster X5. This is the latest version of the Soundblaster kind of external sound card, you could almost call it. And this is an evolution from the X4 that I reviewed recently on the channel. Now the X4 was a little bit disappointing for me in a couple of ways. One of them was it had overcomplicated software. The other was that from a music listing point of view, it was a bit subpar. It wasn't bad by any stretch, but it was much more of a gaming and movie watching device rather than being a do-it-all gaming, movies and music listing device. And so I was really keen to see if the X5 with its new design, some of its new interface and connections, if that could actually fill the void. As much as I really like the design of the old X4, this is it here, I think the move to the new form factor for the X5 is a really welcome change. Not so much from an interactions point of view because the X4 was great for that, but what we've got now is a bit more information on hand, as well as a few more controls that weren't quite as available on the X4. Before I explain some of those sort of external functional changes, let's talk a bit about some of the internal changes going on here. Because one of the biggest upgrades from the X4 to the X5 is the improved DAC functionality and amp functionality going on inside the X5. We've now got a pair of CS43198 DAC chips from Cirrus Logic in here, and those are set up to feed either your line outputs or a balanced headphone circuit. There's also single-ended, of course. But the flagship option here is really the balanced headphone output that'll deliver 109 milliwatts into 32 ohms, or 206 milliwatts into just over 300 ohms. And so knowing that that's what was going on inside in terms of the DAC and the amp, I was curious to see if this was an upgrade. Like I said, the X4 wasn't bad with headphones, but it wasn't special. And what I mean by that was that you could very easily go out and buy something like a FIO K7 or a Schiit Magni and Modi stack, and you'd very quickly have much better music listening sound than the X4 could deliver. With the X5 here, I was hopeful that they'd kind of level the playing field a bit. In addition to the DAC chips and the power and the amplification that I've just mentioned, the other thing worth noting is that the X5 will handle DSD, it'll handle high sample rate PCM, so that's up to DSD 256, and PCM up to 384 kHz. So you've got really good specs for music listening. Theoretically based on the X4, you've already got excellent capabilities for gaming and movie watching. And so it was all starting to come into a package that I was quite interested in. Now it is worth mentioning that the power figures from the X5 aren't world beating. They're not going to drive a Susvara or an Abyss 1266. But with 109 milliwatts into a 32 ohm load, they're going to drive most headphones around. There's very few headphones that need much more than 50 milliwatts to get to very, very loud volumes. There might be a couple here and there, but the X5 is going to drive pretty much any normal, regular headphone to safe volume levels. Where it might come undone with those power specs is if you're using lots of EQ, for instance. But the good news is that you can both export what the X5 is doing to an external DAC and headphone amp, or just use the internal DAC and send that out to a headphone amp as well. And to further explain that, let's do a quick tour of the device, and we might actually start on the back. Looking at the back here, things are pretty simple, but it tells a good story. First and foremost, we've got a line output, so as I said, you can use the DAC and the processing of the X5 to then feed an output to an external headphone amp, and I'll tell you in a moment about where the headphone amp from this one sits. You've then got a line input, so if you do for some reason want to take an external source, feed it into this one, and use it as your headphone amp, you can do that too. Then as we come across the back, we've actually got two optical sockets. One is an input, one is an output. So you can send in an optical feed and use this again as a DAC and or headphone amp. And you can also take optical out of here and send it to an external DAC. And that means you can get all the benefits of the processing, the surround sound capabilities, all of what this is able to do. You can do that DSP or digital sound processing and then send the signal out to an external, really high quality DAC if you want to. We've then got a USB-C socket, that's for the input from your PC, and a USB-A socket, which, as far as I can tell, is really only for connecting up Creative's Bluetooth dongle. So this doesn't come with Bluetooth enabled internally, which I think is a big shame, but you can buy a Creative Bluetooth dongle, which plugs into here and then is controlled or switched on and off through a button on the front. So that's a nice bit of functionality. Like I said, I think it should have been built in. And that reminds me, I was just going to say it should have been built in for the price. I haven't mentioned the price yet. The Soundblaster X5 comes in at $390, which realistically, when you think about the features and functions it delivers with all of the surround sound processing, the digital sound processing in general, combined with having what could be, according to the specs, a good DAC and a headphone amp, $390 starts to look okay. Of course, it's going to come down to how good it sounds, how well it works, and we'll get to that in a moment, but it's generally pretty affordable to start with. While we're talking about the price and the value, I should mention that it does look quite nice, but it does still feel quite plastic, which is a bit of a shame. I think in some ways the X4 actually feels better built. I think for the size, it's actually they're probably about the same weight, but because of the size of this one, it feels more solid. This does feel a bit plasticky. It feels a little bit hollow in some ways. It would have been nice to see a little bit of metal involved. And I'm not talking about creating weight for the sake of creating weight. There are just a few things about this, like the fact that it'll slide around on your desk when you're trying to plug in a 4.4mm connection. If you've got a number of heavy cables hanging out the back of it, it could also slide. Little things like that just all add up to me to make it feel a bit less quality than $390 probably should. And again, if we're talking about benchmark items like the FIO K7 or the Schiit Magni and Modi stack, that's kind of where I expected this to be, and I don't think it has quite the quality feel that it should compared to those sorts of devices. But having said that, let's take a look at the front panel, because one thing it is doing really well from a value point of view is giving you lots and lots of control. It's really excellent, all the different things you can now do from this front panel that was missing on the X4. Starting over here, we've got our power button, so you can toggle it on and off, that's obvious. We've then got a microphone mute button and the Bluetooth toggle button, as I mentioned before. Next to those, we've got a button for the display, so you can toggle which information is being displayed, whether it's the microphone information, the sample rate information, whether you're in DSP or direct mode, I'll explain that later. Anything you can choose, you can flick through and toggle through that with the display button. While we're talking display, it's a really nice, simple, white LED or OLED type display, and it makes things really easy to see at a glance what's going on the unit. Below the display button, we've now got a microphone volume level, and so this means you don't have to use a combination of button presses to choose which thing the volume control is adjusting, and that's how the X4 worked, was you'd have to choose the microphone level and then adjust it using the top wheel. Now you can just adjust your microphone volume here and your main volume over here. Moving on with the tour, next to the microphone level, we've now got a gain switch between low gain and high gain. You're basically going to use that if you're running high impedance for high gain or low impedance for normal gain. And I mean low impedance headphones when I say low impedance. Carrying on from there, we've got a headphone or speaker toggle switch. And this is really handy. If you want to leave your headphones plugged in, you can toggle with the press of a button. But if you don't want to bother toggling, it'll also automatically toggle when you plug in or remove your headphones. So when you remove headphones, it automatically goes to speaker mode. When you plug them back in, it automatically goes to headphone mode. But as I said, if you want to leave everything connected all the time, you can toggle with the press of a button. Sticking with the buttons for a moment, we've then got a button to choose between the direct output mode, so essentially like your bit perfect output, or going into the DSP mode with things like your virtualization, your crystallizer, your dialogue enhancer, all those things, and I'll show you those in a moment. That's where all those things can be switched on and off at the press of a button. That's not to say you can switch off each individual DSP function. The point is you can have all your DSP working for gaming or movies and then press that button to quickly make it bit perfect for audio. Next to that, we've also got our EQ button, and that's going to cycle through 3 presets that you have control of if you want to. You've got 3 different presets and you can cycle through them there. Next to that last button is a switch to move between console and PC mode. So yes, this will also theoretically, I haven't tried this, I don't own any consoles, but theoretically this will also work with your PlayStation, Xbox, etc. If we now jump down below the buttons, we've then got 3 different sockets. One is for your microphone input, one is for a single-ended headphone output, and the other is for the balanced headphone output that I mentioned before. And I might get it out of the way straight away here. There is a significant difference between the output quality of the balanced and the output quality of the single-ended headphone output. So that's a bit of a drawback for me. I'm going to talk mostly in this review about the 4.4mm output, and it is a bit of a shame that you do take a step down when you go to single-ended. One final thing to talk about now is this lovely volume control. This is a fantastic interaction, this volume control, from a number of points of view. Firstly is that it's a very nice smooth turning motion, it feels good in the hand, it's got a nice backlit marker there so you can quickly and easily see where on the dial you are. But what's really good about this as a PC-based device, and one that you're likely to use for things like gaming and movie watching, is that you can control the volume from here, but you can also control it on your computer. So if you want to use the sliders on your computer or a shortcut on your keyboard, it's also controlling this. And what that means is you're not running two different volume controls. You can just always have the one volume control that is either adjusted here or on the computer. And what that means is that if you've adjusted it on the computer, this is not going to move, it's not motorized. But what it does mean is that, let's say you've got the volume dial here down quite low from some headphone listening, and then let's say you switch over to some speaker listening and using your computer controls, you turn it up a bit. What that means is that the Creative Soundblaster X5 is going to recognize the higher volume level until you next turn the volume on here. And what that will instantly do is bring the volume of the computer back down to whatever level you've got this volume knob on. Hopefully that makes sense. The key is both this and the computer volume control talk to one another and synchronize based on whichever one you use last. And I really like that. And so I think in terms of form and function, Creative have done a great job with the X5. I think it's a much more user-friendly device. I don't like the look of it quite as much as the X4, but the interaction is far better as a result. As I said, it would have been nice to see a bit of metal, a bit more high quality of a look and feel for the price you're paying, but I cannot fault the functionality. And so that really leaves us now just wanting to talk about what functions are built into the software and also how it sounds. And so I might step aside for a moment and just show you on screen here some footage that I captured to talk you through the different features and functions that the X5 has from a software point of view, all the DSP controls that it has, and then I'll come back here and talk about sound quality from a pure audiophile point of view. As always, you can use the chapter markers to jump ahead if you don't care so much about the features and functions, or maybe you already know them from having an X4 or an X3, then you can just jump ahead to the music section. The software is very similar between the X5 and the X4, but the good news is they've actually simplified it for the X5. Gone is the old Super X5 functionality, which kind of doubled up on what the audio engine does within the X5 software, and you'll see that in a moment. So I like the fact that they've simplified it, consolidated it, and kept it much more streamlined for use. So first of all, the screen that you get when you open up the Soundblaster X5 or the Creative app as it is interface, what you're going to get is a number of different options down the left and then different options in the middle here. Some of this is customizable. You can see the edit button there. I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs, just what I think is really helpful and relevant. So the first thing is I've currently got direct mode on. Let's turn that off. And I'll just talk through what's on this page. So the first thing is you've got a few different sound modes. You'll notice here if I sort of scroll through these, there's presets for all different games you can choose from. You can play with them, see what you like, what you don't like. What that's going to do is set up things like a customized EQ for that particular game. I haven't played around a lot with them. I'm not a huge fan of that sort of thing. But just to give you an idea, if I choose Counter-Strike there as an example, you'll notice that the equalizer has automatically gone to what Creative or whoever it is has come up with an equalizer that they think works well for Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and you can see the curve there. So that is an interesting feature. It's not one I tend to use, but it's there. And of course, otherwise you can just leave it as the effects off, or you can go to what's called the onboard mode, which is essentially whatever you've set up, whatever you've customized and tweaked will default to what they call onboard mode. So that's what the sound mode is all about. We've then got the acoustic engine, and this is probably the thing that I use the most. So in here we've got the ability for both headphone and speaker outputs to run through things like surround sound, the crystallizer, the bass boost, smart volume, and dialogue plus. Surround is obviously going to give you a pseudo surround sound effect. Crystallizer is going to aim to bring music to a greater level of clarity. I think of it as kind of a clarity slider, and you'll notice that each of these is a slider. So if I turn that one on for a second, you can see I can drag that up and down and adjust the levels. We've then got a bass boost, that's self-explanatory. Smart volume is designed basically as a volume leveler. It's going to help to make sure that the volume, if you're listening late at night, is kept quiet but intelligible, or you can make it like a loudness control with the loud button down here. And then if we have a look at the dialogue plus, that's intended to improve as it says in the description, it's designed to improve the intelligibility of vocals and dialogue in movies, music, in gaming as well, of course. And the same exact settings are available for speakers and for headphones. It will automatically switch depending on what you've got plugged in or what you've got the unit switched to. So that's what the acoustic engine is about. We've then got the equalizer. You've kind of already seen a little bit of that. The way the equalizer works is you've got 3 different presets that you can customize, or it can get the customization coming across from the game mode or the sound mode that I showed you before. And then if you want to just make up your own, then you can very simply just come in here and drag around the sliders as much as you want to. In addition to that, we've got preamp. So if you've got, say, a boost here of, what have we got, 5.6 dB, it's a good idea to pull down your preamp by a similar amount. Now, what's interesting is it's actually not giving us a number for the preamp cut, so you're going to have to guesstimate, which is not ideal. It would have been nice if the same way you get the pop-up when you slide this one, it would have been nice to get the same pop-up on preamp, but that doesn't happen. And then in addition to the preamp, we've also got just a simple bass and treble control, and you can see that's going to adjust the curve within the actual EQ. It's going to override whatever EQ settings you've got, but it's kind of a nice way to quickly play with it. And what you'll see as we play around with it is that as you get up to the top, it starts to become a bit of a shelf rather than just a bass lift. It sort of flattens itself out. And then if you cut it all the way down as well, it does something similar where it becomes a bit more of a shelf and less of just a cut at that 62 Hertz mark. So I kind of like how they've worked it out with the bass and treble controls in there. It's kind of nice. So I'm just going to revert that back to normal. If we move on from EQ, we've then got Crystal Voice. So what Crystal Voice is designed to do is it's going to actually help if you're using your Soundblaster X5 as a comms tool. I'm not going to go through and give you a demo of all this one. It works quite well, but it's going to depend a lot on your setup. If you're using a quality microphone, particularly a boom mic on something like a, say, a Rode NTH100M or an Antline Kimura, you're not going to really need to use some of these things, but it's there should you need it. Let's say, for instance, you've got a microphone that sits across the desk from you, and therefore you might need some extra echo cancellation from the room or whatever space you're in. That's where this could come into play. It also can help to do the volume leveling for you, and also some fun things with voice morph and an EQ setting for the microphone as well. That's presets only, you don't get to control that one. The idea of this one is it can do things like it can fix if you've got any echoes, it can do a smart volume, so it's basically auto gaining for your microphone. I didn't like what the auto gain did because essentially, I'm going to turn it on for just a second and I apologize that it's going to basically massively compress everything and I don't like it. So for me, I'd be leaving that one off. Then you've got some fun here, you can do some voice morphing. So let's go through these. This is essentially if you want to disguise your voice, you want to have some fun with it, etc. I'm not recommending people disguise their voices for any reason other than to have fun with friends. So you've got neutral, that's not going to do anything at all. But then you can go to things like there's what they call a male voice, which will deepen it slightly. We can then go to a female voice, which to my ears doesn't sound entirely like a female, it just sounds like a high-pitched male, but I'll let you decide on that one.
You can make yourself sound like a child, which I actually think is not doing too bad of a job. It's one of those things that it's going to depend on what your expectations are, I guess.
The elderly one I was incredibly impressed with. When I heard this back, it's done an amazing job of somehow modulating the voice to give it that sort of slightly quavery, wavery sound.
The deep voice, that's basically like you're completely disguising the voice like you would have heard on a TV current affairs show where they're interviewing someone that wants to remain anonymous.
This one's dreadful. This is modulating the voice, I'm assuming, to sound like you're a Canadian, because it's giving that lilting up and down kind of tonality, but it's never at the right times in the phrases, or really, by luck, it might be at the right times in the phrases, so I just found it a bit silly. I'll let you decide if that's silly or not.
Unstable? I don't know what that's intended to be. I guess that's just like a quavery kind of voice. I don't think it means they're unstable psychologically. I hope it doesn't.
Emo, the only thing I can think here is that it is somehow reducing the range of tonality in the voice is all I could tell. So if I talk with a lot of extra emphasis and a lot of extra range in the pitch of my voice, that should have actually evened that out so you wouldn't have heard it. Let's wait and see. I can't hear what I'm saying at the moment through the system, so I have no idea if you're actually hearing what I think you're hearing from Emo. I just know what I heard before. It was unclear what it did, and the only thing I can think of is that in my test footage, I might have had more intonation than it sounded like I had coming back. Now we've got some sort of role-playing type specific things. So we've got Dwarf here. Apparently this is what dwarves sound like.
And apparently this is what an elf sounds like, so now I should sound like an elf to you if you're familiar with elves.
The demon one has quite a good sound to it, but I found it really hard to understand, so that's a bit of a problem for me if the intelligibility goes bad.
I have no idea what infiltrate is meant to mean. It's got a very distinct sound. So if there's a particular kind of character type or class type somewhere that you know from a game, let me know in the comments what the infiltrate is all about. Next up, sorry, missed click again.
Now we've got the brute, so this is obviously just making you sound a bit like a thug. Then we move to orc, which is not dissimilar to brute, but it's got a little bit of a different sound to it.
Marine, I actually thought this one was quite good. It
was one of those where I thought, what's the sound of a marine? I didn't know that marines had a sound, but I did kind of like what it did to the sound of the voice. So if you wanted to have a bit of fun and give yourself this sort of a sound, marine is there. Then the
obvious one of chipmunk, that's, we've all heard this one before. And then finally,
There's a robot one which I wasn't overly impressed with. I think they could have gone a bit further with this one to make it more fun, but hey, it's in there if you want to play with it. So that's what the voice morph does for you. That's how you can sort of have some fun with that if you want to. And then the final thing, which is actually quite cool, is you can use a microphone equalizer. So with this one, this gives you the ability to run through a whole lot of different presets. And I'll turn it on now. And what you're hearing straight away is the improved clarity preset, which I think actually is quite good. Then though, you can also look at other things like improve vocal and clarity, whatever that means. So we'll hear the difference there. You could also do things like if you want to, let's say, reduce harshness and improve vocal and clarity. So that should be exactly what you had before, but just also reducing harshness. And then if you want, you can do things like remove bass and harshness and improve clarity. So you can play around with those, find the one that's right for you, your voice and your microphone. I think it's quite a cool feature. I was particularly impressed, as I said before, when I heard just the simple improved clarity. I thought it worked really well. So you can use that one if you want to. Then we go to direct mode. This is what I had switched on before. This is just going to be a very quick switch bypass of whatever else is going on. So you might have it in a mode that's ready for movie listening or gaming of a particular game, and then you want to listen to some music and you want just a pure bit perfect sound. That's where you choose direct mode. As you can see, there's no settings to choose in there, and then all you need to do is just click on direct mode and you're getting an absolutely untouched signal from the input of the USB signal to the output, either to the speakers or to your headphones. Then we've got scout mode here. So scout mode is going to give you a sort of customized way of bringing forward sounds like gunfire, gun handling noises, the footsteps, things like that. It's going to help you to hear more of what's going on in the environment within the game you're playing. It's not a feature I tend to enjoy using particularly, but I know that some people, so for say first-person shooters, some people are going to really love it. It's a simple toggle on-off. The only other thing to do in here is that you can choose a keystroke to switch it on and off easily while you're in a game. So maybe you don't want to actually play with it on all the time, but in particular moments you want to switch it on to focus in on where sounds are coming from. That's what the hotkey's for, and that's where you can quickly toggle between scout mode on and scout mode off. Finally, we've got the mixer. The mixer is going to let you choose just the levels of different inputs and outputs from the device. It's really just a way for you to tweak exactly what you're hearing. Then we're going to go to playback. This is where you can choose things like, if I go down here, there are some preset headphones in there, so it will actually, you can tell it exactly which headphone you're using. That's going to improve the surround sound virtualization technique it uses. And then you can also choose with your speakers. So here you can choose to use the exact same settings that you've got for your headphones over to your speakers to save having different settings if you want to. And here we can tell it where we've got, say, a desktop, bookshelf, tower, or a custom speaker. And that's going to help with things like, as you can see there, things like the crossover frequency, where you want the bass boost to occur, etc. So in fact, we'll actually have a look at that now. If we now go over to the acoustic engine and go to the bass settings and come back now into playback, what you'll see now is that for custom, I can choose where the crossover frequency lies. But if I move through from desktop, we've got 150 Hertz crossover. Bookshelf goes to 80 Hertz. And tower, if I actually click on it, goes down to 50 Hertz. So it's got to very sort of intelligently or somewhat intelligently work out what the correct crossover frequency is. So I know for me, the bookshelf setting is about right. For my Harberts, I use the P3 ESR. So yeah, the P3 ESR XD. I use those and they do roll off at about 80 Hertz. So that's just perfect for those. Then we can move on to recording. This is where you can tell it which sorts of inputs to use at what sample rates. Again, it's one of those things that's just for tweaking and getting it set up how you like. If we have a look at an example, you can choose from anything from 16-bit 48 kilohertz all the way up to 24-bit 192 kilohertz. Then if we go over to settings, this is just where you get into things like updating your firmware, checking for drivers. You can choose how bright the display panel is on the X5. You can pair up Bluetooth if you've got the Bluetooth dongle connected, because it's not a built-in Bluetooth connection on this one, or internal module I should say. You do have to have the dongle extra. And that's pretty much all there is to the settings. Coming back now to talking about sound quality of the X5 as a pure listening device. And so everything I'm going to talk about now is in direct mode.
There's no DSP being applied, there's no EQ being applied. It's just about how well does it work as a pure music listening DAC for those of you that want bit perfect audio. For all this testing, I was using the balanced output direct into headphones, and I've tried a bunch of different headphones with the X5, and it's driven them all beautifully. As I said before, it's not a hugely powerful device, but it's plenty powerful enough for most normal headphones. You're not going to drive Susvaras, Abyss, etc., but I've used it with Focal Utopias, the Mesa Elites. I'm not recommending it as being good enough to get the most out of those, but in terms of driving those sorts of headphones, no problems at all. The recently reviewed O2 headphones from ETA, the Hyphoman Aria Organic and the Ananda Nano, I played around with this. So it's going to drive all of those, no problems at all, unless, as I said before, you're going to use massive amounts of EQ and therefore need the extra power to make up for that extra boost you're adding. But putting that aside and just sticking in bit perfect output through the balanced headphone socket, I was actually really impressed with what I heard from the X5. It delivers sound that's well detailed but still smooth, with good separation between the individual sounds and instruments. And all in all, for the price, as an all-in-one, just thinking about it for music, I actually think it's now performing at about the same level as other things at the price point. As I said earlier, I was unimpressed with the X4 as a music listening device. I thought it was fine as a do-it-all gaming, movie and music device. But if you really wanted dedicated audio quality, I don't think the X4 was a good solution. Whereas now, you can very much have the X5 as your dedicated music device, and then it's also giving you excellent control, as you've seen, excellent control and features for gaming and movies. As I've already said, going from the balanced output to the single-ended 3.5mm output is a bit of a step back. What you're specifically losing is that sense of separation I mentioned, and also the level of detail. So it's becoming a little bit more like the X4 in that regard. It's just an okay source for the single-ended output, but I think it's good. I think it's solid to good for the balanced output, given everything else that it offers. I'm not sitting here suggesting that it is now better than alternatives around the same price, but I think it's on par. So if you're looking at a FIO all-in-one or a stack from Schiit Audio, I think this is going to come close enough in its sound quality through the balanced output that you're going to be happy enough using it for music and then having all the extra functionality that those other devices don't have. I still think if you're looking for a pure audio device, there's probably no point buying an X5. It's really directed at people that want the DSP functions for gaming and movies or music if you want it, and so do think of it in those terms. Something else that I always like to test in an all-in-one is how well the individual DAC and amplifier perform. And one of the things I like to do there is test if the sound quality from the device improves drastically when you take an analog output into an external headphone amp. And the answer here is that it does improve a little bit. So going to a high-quality amp like the Geshelli A3 Pro or Burson Soloist 3XP or even the 3X GT that I think I used here, when you do that, you do hear that it does get better. The sound quality does improve a little bit, but it's not a vast leap. And so what that means is that the DAC in here is not being held back significantly by the internal headphone amp, and that means you're going to be getting almost the maximum performance you can using the internal headphone amp. And that's great. It means you don't have to buy an external amp to get the most out of the X5. At least to get most of the most. So we're probably talking about 90% performance from the internal headphone amp, maybe even 95%, and then just an incremental improvement if you do upgrade the headphone amp to an external one. And so I was quite impressed generally with the performance of the DAC within here. Having heard it through a high quality headphone amp, it was sounding pretty good. But the one final thing I wanted to do from a sound quality point of view was just check how good the DAC in here was. So I knew already that the headphone amp was giving a fairly good performance and getting most of what it could out of the DAC, and that then had me wondering if the DAC was as good as I thought. To test this, I pulled out the Geshelli Labs J2 S-DAC running the AK4493 chip. If you haven't checked out that review, make sure you do. There's some game-changing stuff going on here. But putting the Creative X5 up against the J2 DAC, which by the way costs about $260 depending on how you spec it, for about $260 for the J2 on its own, up against $390 for the X5 here, the J2 was only marginally better, and that's a really good sign. Obviously, you're paying more for the X5 than the J2, but it's also doing more. It's giving you preamp capabilities to drive external speakers. It's giving you an internal headphone amp, which we've established is very good for the money. It's giving you all kinds of DSP functionality and the software to help you control it. So it's doing way more. And so I think the J2 DAC from Geshelli Labs is kind of a good reference point for the performance that I would expect from something like the X5. And I do think that the J2 should be a little bit better because it's a dedicated DAC and it's costing more than half of what you're going to spend on this. But the good news is this is not falling very far behind the J2. The J2 does come out ahead with a little bit of extra nuance, a little bit of extra detail in the sound. But beyond that, things like staging, separation of sounds, the general tonality of the DACs, both of them are very, very similar. And so knowing that this is actually performing about the same, not quite, but almost the same as a really quality, budget, affordable audiophile DAC, tells me that what you've got going on here is a budget audiophile quality DAC. This thing is as good as pretty much anything else you're going to buy for around about the same price. And I mean that both in terms of its headphone amp and its DAC quality. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you were to buy yourself an X5 and down the track you want to upgrade further, the cool thing about the X5 is that those optical outputs on the back, or the optical output, there's only one, but the optical output on the back can feed out with all the DSP controls to an external DAC. So you could buy yourself this one now and then keep it in your chain to provide DSP and processing, whilst also upgrading down the track to a better quality DAC. So you might, for instance, decide later on to buy yourself a Schiit Bifrost 264, or maybe you buy yourself the Geshelli Labs J2S with the AK4499EX chip, which is insanely good. In both of those cases, you're going to get yourself a really top-level DAC, but then you've already got the DSP functionality in here. Take an optical output from this one, feed it into your high-level DAC, connect that up to a high-level headphone amp, and you've got all the benefits of the X5 with a much better audiophile system. By the way, none of that part is different from the X4. It could also output to an external DAC. But what I like about the X5 in particular is that it's now a nice stepping stone product. It's a gateway or entry product into a combination gaming audiophile audio system that just so happens to then scale if you go further down the audiophile path. And so I really like it for that capability, and that's why I'm going to say that I think the X5 is a product if you're into gaming and audio from a music point of view. I think the X5 is definitely a product to watch out for. So if you do want to hear how those functions work, what they're doing in the sound, how the processing affects what you hear through your headphones or your speakers, then do watch on and check out the last little bit here where I show you what they do. But for now, I'm going to sign off. So I'm just going to say, I hope you found this video useful and helpful. If you have, please hit the like button and please subscribe and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. But for now, let me leave it to the music. Happy listening, happy gaming. I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound, but for now, enjoy hearing what the X5 is capable of. Alright, so I'm going to walk over here and find somewhere that we can get some ambient sounds, maybe fire off a few rounds and kill some beasties, and give you a sense of what the different options are. We're in direct mode at the moment, which means you're getting the sound straight out of the game, so it's not messing with it at all, it's just trying to give you the best possible reproduction of that sound. And now what we might do is I might just stop here for a second, and we're going to change over and use a different sound mode for you. And I'm going to show you the acoustic engine, because this is the stuff that I find the most helpful.
Breaking news from Earth. Widespread chaos and mayhem. World President urges all citizens to do their part and harvest alien artifacts.
So now, hopefully what you're hearing
Harvest.
is a much more surround sound type effect.
Your contract legally compels you to harvest this artifact.
Now it's not a perfect surround sound, so for instance things like the sound of this artifact here are a bit lower than they were before. Whoops, sorry about that folks. So you can't hear that as clearly as when the surround sound was off, and other sounds are unaffected.
Harvest it.
But I do like the fact that it takes the sound out of your head a little bit more. And so if I now go and turn that surround sound off again, hopefully you're hearing the difference there, and hopefully you've even got headphones on to try this out. If not, grab some headphones, jump back and try that bit again. Now as I mentioned before, we've got other features in here, like for instance we can go to the bass edition. I do like that for adding a bit of extra oomph to the sound. And then we've got things like Smart Volume and Crystallizer. Let me show you what Smart Volume does. If I switch that on, you should have heard that all the ambient sounds have kind of come up in volume. And what you'll notice is that the gunshot sounds are actually not as loud as they were in relation to the ambient sounds now. So obviously you can do things like put smart volume with surround sound, and it helps to balance off where the different sounds are placed in terms of the mix, not physically so much as the volume level, I mean. You've also got night mode, which will help to quieten things down even further. Or you've got loud mode, which just kind of maxes out everything and compresses the hell out of it. I don't tend to use smart volume, I leave that mostly off. And the other two I want to show you is Crystallizer and Dialogue Plus, and I might go to a different game to show you those now. Before I do though, I want to show you one more thing, which is Scout mode. So the idea of Scout mode is this is going to give you, according to Creative, this should be giving you lots of access to things like gun handling sound, footsteps, etc. It's a little bit like Super X5 Battle, it's also a little bit like the Footstep EQ, but apparently it's doing it differently. So I'm now over in the music platform that I use for all of my Passion for Sound videos, and what I want to do is quickly play a couple of tracks and just show you some of the functions that are more music and movie related. So if we go in now, and we might start with just a quick sample of some music that is without any additions whatsoever, no tweaks, no alterations. Let's find a track here. We'll go with this one I was playing before. Start from the beginning.
We fell in love at a bad time, getting insecure.
So no alterations here.
Myself on the way down.
And the first thing I want to show you is if we go to Acoustic Engine,
So tired of breathing
I'm going to turn on the Crystallizer now.
underwater. I just wanna flow like a
So you can hear that's enhanced the upper frequencies, upper mid-range and the treble.
sheet of paper.
Obviously that's on 100% if I pull it down.
Need to take
60%.
comfort in myself like a roller coaster.
And that's with it off
1 week I am off, next one I'll be
versus on.
but I'm
And
getting
it does vary depending on the track you're listening to. So I'll go across to this other one. Crystallizer off. Crystallizer on. So I find on some genres it sounds quite good. On other genres like this one, I'd personally prefer to have it off because the samples get just a bit too crispy for me when it's on. So that's what the Crystallizer does. You get a fairly good sense there. If I'm going to scroll it up and down one more time so you can get a sense of it. So you can have it on just a little bit if you want to, of course. And then, if we just go back and look at the dialogue now, I'm going to go back to the original track up here that I was using, so I can show you what Dialogue Plus does. Just wait for the vocals to kick in.
every guy I've met. We fell in love.
That's Dialogue Plus on at 49. And I'm going to ramp it all the way up to 100, and you'll hear just how much it isolates the vocal.
Insecure, questioning myself on the way down. Now I'm so tired.
So you can imagine how good that could be for watching movies. If you really want to be able to hear the dialogue better, it can be really effective. And again, you can scale it as much as you need to. You know, you could pair that up with something like Smart Volume
Right now I need
and
to
really help to kind of reduce your peaks and troughs in the sound from a dynamics point of view, and also hone in on the dialogue. It does make things sound a bit unnatural though. I'll just pause for a second so you can hear that.
1 week I am off, next one I'll be down, but I'm getting closer to a stronger me, feeling free.
Smart Volume off now.
Like a roller coaster fun,
It helps take away some of the compression.
feeling free.
And then back to normal. You can hear such a dramatic difference when I switch it off there.
Grandpa used to ask why I'm single with such